toilets downstairs. This event has been put on by Kensal and Kilburn Better 2017. It's a group, there's four of us, Melissa Ben, Richie Walker, Tom Leonard somewhere, and myself. It's called Better 2017 because we were pretty depressed at the end of 2016. And we thought, well, let's hopefully be better in 2017. And what we've done is we put on a series of talks about things which we think are important, get some really good people to talk about them, and then have a discussion. That's the idea. This is our third. The first one was on social care, the second one was on the media, and this is our third one. And we're absolutely thrilled to have such eminent guests with us today, but I'm not going to introduce them because I'm going to leave that to Richie to do that. He's your host for tonight, and I'm going to hand around this hat. We're not trying to make a profit, we're just trying to cover our costs. If you literally feel like putting in £1 or £2, that would be very kind. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, and welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming out on a lovely evening. So the objective tonight is we want to mark the 10th anniversary of the global financial crash of 2007 by learning more about the new economics, or heterodox economics. Since we set the date, we've had the unexpected election, which had an unexpected result. And so we're now in a situation where sort of Corbynistas are thinking about preparing for government, which was quite surprising to some people. And we sort of wanted to reflect that in what we spoke about tonight. So we're actually now on our third title for tonight's event. So we started off with what is the new economics. Then we moved to can we avoid another financial crisis? And we are now then moved on to what would a clever Corbyn economic strategy be? So I'm hoping we're going to cover all those issues tonight. And we couldn't have two better expert guests to talk about this with, Steve Keen and Ann Pettifor, two of the world's most eminent heterodox or rebel economists. And they're hugely accomplished experts, they're world famous, but they're also decent enough to come out to us on a weekday evening, summer evening. So thank you so much for doing that. So I'm going to introduce Steve first. Steve is Professor of Economics at Kingston University in London. But before that, you were at Western Sydney, and you came over here in 2014. I was going to wave your book around, which is in that bag over there. I'm going to go get it.
Now, which one, the old one or the new one?
I'm going to show off. So, I forgot my props.
Okay.
So, yes.
There you go, all three. Well done. Okay.
So tell us about what you're doing at Kingston and this book, debunking economics, and what you're doing here while you're in London.
Well, the short answer is I'm here courtesy of neoliberalism. I was exported from Australia, courtesy of a policy of deregulating first-year student intake at universities, because we all know things work better when you make into a market, don't they? Well, it worked beautifully. So we went from having a heterodox department in the University of Western Sydney with a fairly reliable intake of about 150 students a year. And then they deregulated the market. Of course, students are extremely well-informed shoppers at universities. They've all bought 60 or 100 university degrees in the last year, and they know what's a good one and a bad one. So they flock off to the well-rated ones and don't give a shit about the ones with an equal no reputation. And so we went from 120 first enrolments to 16 in 1 year. Not quite enrolments, that was the pre-enrolment, but my university then, in its eminent wisdom and very, very well managed and a very empathic, touchy-feely institution, they announced they were going to shut the department down 2 weeks before the students' final exams, made 10% of academic staff redundant, and they allowed 1 hour for discussion. And after enormous protest, they allowed 2 hours for discussion. They then terminated the position of 5 of the 6 professors, including me, and we then fought them over redundancy, all sorts of wonderful stuff like that. I thought it was the end of my academic career, and was doing my own stuff back in Australia. And then out of the blue, I got asked to apply for the chairing of the department or the school at Kingston, which is economics, history, and politics together. And shortly after I arrived, we've got a very strong heterodox department. I hired 6 new staff who were all extremely good, non-orthodox thinkers in economics. It was quite a strong little group out of about 20 staff. There were 2 or 3 more heterodox staff there, so the whole emphasis was on developing a new economics. And 6 months after I arrived, government decided to copy that great idea of the Australian government of deregulating first-year intake. So we went from 140 students to 70 to 50, and Kingston went from 22,000 students to 15,000 over that period of time, and that's destroyed the financial basis for our department, unfortunately. So I've decided to take retirement from next year. But for a couple of years we had a chance to try to build a non-orthodox curriculum, but that's been undermined because all the money goes to the orthodoxy, none of it goes to the heterodoxy. We get jobs at not lousy universities, but low-ranked universities. And of course they're incredibly fragile to any change in government policy. But I'm in London to stay, so this has got me across the various oceans I had to cross to get here.
Okay, and you're in the small club who predicted the 2007 global financial crisis. What's your claim to fame on that?
In terms of why I predicted it?
Well, famously, the Queen said nobody saw it coming.
Oh, yeah,
you were one of the people who had seen
it. It just shows that Anne and I are both nobodies. Because, I mean, you had to be specially trained not to see the bloody thing coming, frankly. It took an economics degree not to be able to see the economy is about to fall apart. So it's not that it's unusual for people to say this crisis is coming, because we were talking to a guy from banking a short while ago. He was caught by surprise, but the signals are just screaming at you. Stock market people were getting out, realtors were looking at it and saying this is crazy. They're just saying crazy, or I'm really enjoying the cocaine so I can't notice. But it was obvious, economists was the least well-informed profession of it, but within that there are a few renegades like myself and Anne who've always focused on the importance of money. And the crazy thing is, we could say this to people in meetings like this before the crisis, that economists model the economy as if banks, money and debt don't exist. Yeah. And they model as if it's always in equilibrium. And people say, okay, what have they been drinking? Unfortunately, we've been drinking water.
So this is the book you've written now, which came out in June, I think?
Yeah.
May. Can we avoid another financial crisis? Don't answer that question just yet, but why did you write it now?
It's actually partly because I got a very sensible suggestion from the publisher. Apology approached me, and I want to write a magnum opus, the giant, mold my thoughts in one large book idea. And I've been putting that off for roughly 20 years, because my ideas have been changing. Would be that takes an amount of time I've never had. And they came forward with the suggestion of this book title with 25,000 words, and I thought I can write that in a weekend. And I did, pretty much. A fair bit of editing was done, but about 2 months' worth of work or less, and I could finish it. And to me, it's perfect timing, because there's a whole bunch of economies that went through the crisis in 2008 and avoided it because they borrowed their way out of it. Now, by borrowing, I mean borrowing private debt. Government debt is not an issue, which we'll talk about as time goes on today. But they managed to avoid the credit crisis by continuing to expand credit, and they're now coming up to their falling off the cliff moment. So this was a fairly perfect time to be warning about it. And one of them, of course, is the country that our current central bank governor here used to be central bank governor of, which is Canada.
Right. So we're gonna come back to that, but you're forecasting financial crash in named countries
in about 7 to 15 countries all up
within the next sort of 6 to 12
months. The next 1 to 3 years.
1 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Steve. I'm now going to introduce Ann Pettifor, who is now you're from South Africa, but you've been in London much longer, right? So when did you get here?
Yeah, press
the button.
And my wife was Greenwich.
There it goes.
Okay.
So I came here in 1968, before you were born.
Not much. I was one.
Yes, I came over when I was 20 years old in 68.
Right.
So but of course, I was born. You can take a girl out of the Orange Free State, but you can't take whatever it is. But you can't take the Orange Free State out of her. And I came from this little backwoods place in South Africa, which actually was really very helpful in some ways, because it was a gold mining town. And I grew up during a period when the gold price was fixed, because Bretton Woods was still in place. And I remember my dad used to have to wake us up at 5 in the morning to get to work and to town in time. And we had these long car journeys, and I'd say to him, but why is the gold price unchanged?
Oh my gosh, she's a why, Dad. And it's in the car talking about gold.
I mean, our town was just about gold. Why did the gold price never rise, but other prices rose? And my poor old dad wasn't very well educated, had to explain to me, you know, about the international financial architecture and Bretton Woods. So, you know, at the age of 9, 10, 11, I was puzzling over these things. So there were some advantages to growing up in this bit of the backwoods.
And then your highlights for your career in London include GLC,
Yeah.
New Economics Foundation,
Yes.
and your current place, which is the Prime.
So what you've missed out is Jubilee 2000, which
Yes.
was mine, which is really the thing that transformed my life, really, because I'm an African, I was born in Africa. I was really interested in the fact that countries, sovereigns had built up masses of debt and were being punished effectively for these very high levels of debt that had been thrown at them, really, credit that had been thrust upon them by very much richer countries, richer sovereigns. And so that plunged me into the whole issue of the international financial system. I spent a lot of time in Washington. I learned an enormous amount from the IMF and the World Bank, even though there are many bad guys in there. There's actually some superb research goes on in there too. And so I was part of the movement that cancelled about $100 billion of debt owed by 35 of the poorest countries. And then I worked very closely with the Nigerian government to help them clear $30 billion worth of debt at Paris Club, which was a fascinating experience. And I was in Argentina doing the Argentine crisis. So that's where I did that's where I got.
And did you organise this, helped to organise the surrounding of the G7 summit, which people might remember?
Yes.
And do you think that's made a difference? Did that help swing it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when I was interviewed for the job, they said to me, well, we'd like you to go to Washington and get the debt cancelled. And I said, look, I'm a very smart cookie, but not even I can do that. I said, you know, we need a public discussion about this, and we need public pressure on the shareholders of the World Bank, who are the G7, and our government is one of the biggest shareholders, right? And they said, oh, that can't be done. You know, people don't understand sovereign debt and multilateral debt, bilateral debt, net present value of debt. This is all beyond the public. And I said, I don't believe that. I think you can explain it to the people, and when they understand. And it was amazing, because first of all, we had the support of churches, which is why I come in here, something that I'm very used to, speaking in churches. And of course, the church has globalised long before McDonald's did, you know, and so there's churches all over the world, and so they had a fantastic network for talking about this stuff. And we had a very, you know, under-resourced little secretariat in London, and we simply sort of sent out, and we were around at the beginning, if you like, of the internet revolution, where we could actually email people. Even
the thanks for emails.
Yeah, and so we could send out emails with briefings about why Uganda's debt was what it was, and blah, blah. So people became incredibly well informed, and Gordon Brown had to hire extra people in the Treasury to deal with all the correspondence. And I remember a Treasury official coming up to me and saying, you know, this is really weird. I get letters on pieces of pink paper with a bunch of roses in them. And it's Mrs. Jones saying, I understand that you chose a cut-off date for assessing Uganda's debt as 1981, and I think such a cut-off date is really totally unacceptable. How the hell did she find out about this? And women were at their kitchen tables writing letters to the Treasury saying that they understood exactly how Uganda's debt had been assessed and how wrong it was. And it was incredibly empowering for people to understand how the system worked. So you didn't even need to mobilise them. They mobilised themselves, really. So we got 100,000 people to stand outside the G8 when they came to Birmingham in 1998. And the Treasury and the Foreign Office, which worked really hard to demobilise them with the thing, were absolutely astounded that 100,000 people cared about this stuff, you know, because we were supposed to all be Thatcherite, anti-aid, the rest, you know, sort of individualists, where loads of money was. I remember you weren't here, Steve, but there was a wonderful comedian, Harry, Enfield, on the telly, used to go around with sort of wads, talk about having loads of money. And you know, this was the kind of culture in which we plunged this whole campaign, and people weren't stupid, you know, they got it. When they got it, they were mad as hell.
Okay, so then your global financial prediction claim to fame is a good one.
Yeah.
You've got a book out.
We got 2 books out. because I noticed you had missed out to the 2003 book, which I edited at the New Economics Foundation with a bunch of colleagues from the New Economics Foundation. And we predicted then, the thing that we never got right, and we won't get right now, is the actual timing. You know, what is going to be the thing that will trigger this? That is the hard. I mean, if we could do that, we'd make loads of bucks, wouldn't we? You know, you wouldn't have to worry about raising finance for your work, Steve, would you? But so getting the timing right. So in 2003, we edited this book, and the New Statesman put it on the front cover and said, you know, there was going to be a big crisis, and it felt like a lead balloon. Everybody thought, oh, just a bunch of lefties, you know, trying to sort of wishful thinking. And then in 2006, I became really, 2005, really worried. All my friends were taking out mortgages, borrowing crazy money. My children want to borrow crazy money to buy a house in London and all that stuff. So I wrote this book in the spring of 2006. And the publisher said, let's call it the coming First World Debt Crisis. And I said, I don't know First World, Third World, I think that's wrong anyway. And by the way, you can't call it the coming First World Debt Crisis because by the time it's published in October 2006, the thing will have come and the book will be out of date. And I was wrong. And she had the rights over the title. And the book was published and it felt like a lead balloon too. But today, just the title gets me a lot of credit.
Right, and I'm just going to wave around your new book, which came out in May.
Yeah.
This is The Production of Money, How to Break the Power of Bankers.
Yeah.
So, can you just very quickly say why you wrote it?
I wrote it because I think it's absolutely vital that ordinary people understand money, how it's created effortlessly, and therefore how the financial system works. And it's not rocket science. The way it's talked about, if it is talked about, Steve is right, economists don't talk about money, debt, or banks. But when they do, they make it sound very, very complicated. And we are very, what is the word, conflicted about money because it's so important to us. We're so emotionally kind of involved in money as well. So it's quite hard. I want us to really get it, and then once you get it, you'll be as mad as I am.
Okay.
That's angry as not insane.
Yeah.
They're the insane ones.
All right. Okay, so what we're going to try and do in the next sort of 40 minutes or so.
Is this dog not welcome? Is there something about why this fellow has to...
He's not with the orchestra, which I noticed that you think
All right.
is fascinating.
Well, if you want to come in, please do. If you can hear us through the door, that's fine. So we're going to try and chat through 4 things in the next sort of 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd so for Q&A. And what we're going to try and cover is broadly speaking, it's not easier said than done, but broadly the content of these 2 books are some of the key points from it. And so where we've been, where we're at now, and I want to make sure we leave time for where you think we should go next, right? So we might have to hurry along. So, as we said, it's 10 years since the 2007 crisis. So the first proposition is we need to learn the lessons of what happened then and the response to it, you know, what are the lessons? The second thing that we think we should cover, because you both touched on it already, is orthodox economics currently remains part of the problem rather than part of the solution, and that's not changed enough in 10 years. The third proposition is we're actually in a bad economic place at the moment, even if we don't fully realise it. Some of us, it depends which end of the telescope you're looking at, but you call it the mess we're in, you call it the zombie economy. So we want to cover that. And then the final section, which is the proposition is there is a clever economic strategy that we can pursue. It does exist. But none of the 3, neither the Conservatives nor the Lib Dems nor the kind of pre-Corbyn Labour Party would consider the kind of radical changes that you guys think are needed. However, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party is considering those things, and you guys are advising them as from his panel of heterodox economists. So I want to talk about that, and we want to sort of actually screw out of you the answer to the question, what would a clever Corbyn economic strategy be? And what are the risks it incurs and what are the benefits it offers. And the final part of that proposition is what you said, is that it's not enough for Corbyn to have a policy, he needs a citizens' movement behind him demanding it,
Yeah.
surrounding the
Yeah.
G7 or whatever.
Yeah.
So this is an experiment, so I'm not going to guarantee we're going to do it, but we're going to give it a go, okay? So my first question is to Steve, and it's about 10 years on from the financial crisis. As briefly as you can, what went right with the way the world responded to it, and what went wrong? And you know, sort of taking us up to, say, you know, a couple of years ago type thing.
Well, nothing went right. What went right actually was institutional factors that Keen economics was busy trying to dismantle before the crisis happened, and that is the scale of government spending we have now is about 5 times what it was compared to GDP before the Great Depression and the Second World War. And so you all heard of the New Deal. The New Deal at its maximum was funded by a 5% of GDP deficit, whereas Obama's deficit, which of course there was nothing anywhere near as well planned as the things like the Tennessee electrification and the Hoover Dam and so on during.
I'll just say, the New Deal was Roosevelt's thing in America in the 30s.
Yeah, okay. Then it was 3 times the scale. So the level of deficit that was run by Obama was 15% of GDP versus 5% at the maximum during the New Deal. Now that meant that was additional government spending that counteracted the extent to which the private sector was deleveraging. So rather than plunging into Great Depression levels of debt, you had an increase in government spending that if it hadn't been there, you would have hit Great Depression levels. So that's the one thing that was done right. But of course, the economics profession obsesses about the level of government debt and ignores the level of private debt. So that then pressure shifted over to what they saw the need to get austerity to bring the books back into balance again. And what actually doesn't balance the books, it burns the books. Because when you have a government, and this is a little analogy I worked out recently that actually I think makes it sensible for people to understand it, but what people tend to do is they work from a household analogy. If you save money, then I can save money too. But if you save money, that actually your saving directly reduces somebody else's income. It's a one-for-one causal link between the two. So the whole idea of saving on austerity is actually destroying income. And that's what's extenuated the crash, the slump. Now, what's happened on the other side of that to balance it to some extent is the monumental amount of money used in QE. But that monumental amount of money ends up 90% of it driving up asset prices. Maybe 10% turns up in the real economy. So that extra spending, given its scale, has been sufficient again to attenuate the crisis. But we have ended up, post the crisis now, with the level of private debt, to give you an idea of its scale, in America, 1.5 times GDP versus a peak of 1.7 times, when after the Great Depression, or in the Second World War, it was 1/3 of GDP.
Okay.
So you still have more than an entire year's worth of private debt above the level that led to the growth of the 50s and 60s, and the UK is worse.
Can I just try a little experiment, right? Put your hand up if you're confident you know what QE or quantitative easing means or is. And if you don't be ashamed. I just wanted to get a feel for that, because this is a kind of issue that we've got. Just very quickly, what was QE?
Okay, QE, the government, the central bank is buying and selling bonds all the time. It's what they call repurchase agreements they're making all the time, which is part of how they try to manipulate liquidity inside the economy. And it's also, if government bonds aren't sold, and the central bank buys those bonds off the private sector, to mean that the private sector then buys the bonds, so there's a guarantee government will get its finances. That's part of the role of the central bank at all times. What QE was deciding to declare it's going to be on the majority buy side. So normally it might be buying and selling, in other words, it's going to be majority sell, majority buy of bonds. When the government sells bonds, when the central bank sells bonds to the public, which is the usual situation, that's taking money out, because it says, here's a bond, you can have it for £100, well therefore £100 comes out of circulation, goes to the central bank. In the opposite direction, if they say, we're going to buy £200 billion more worth of bonds than we sell, that's saying we're going to inject £200 billion into the balance sheets of the private banks, pension funds, insurance companies and so on.
Okay.
Now, when they do that, the theory was, and this is one part of the theory is bullshit, the other part of the theory actually works but very badly. The theory was that would give the banks an extra £200 billion in reserves. According to the economic theory, banks lend out reserves, and they lend out a multiple of reserves. So they're supposed to hang on to every pound that's deposited. Let's say every £10 that's deposited, they're supposed to hang on to one, lend out 9, and you go through a chain reaction. That £10 lending creates 100. So part of the theory was that £200 billion worth of money could potentially create £2 trillion worth of lending, and that would stimulate the economy. That's bullshit. We can explain why shortly. That's crap. That just doesn't work. And they've got these huge excess reserves. But what the banks do, when the banks sell their bonds to the central bank, what they do is their bond reserves go down, and bonds earn income for the banks. Their cash reserves go up, which earn no income. So they're supposed to think, well, let's use this cash to buy shares. And they do go and do that. When they buy the shares, they buy it off people who don't live in, well, maybe they do live around here, but they certainly live in Kensington. Those people then get a £200 billion profit if the price effect goes all the way through. They might use 90% of that to buy other assets, so they inflate the price of houses in Chelsea and so on. And then they might spend £10 billion worth of that, or £20 billion on the rest of us. So of that £200 billion, maybe 20 billion turns up in circulation in the real economy. Now, I can think of better ways to spend £200 billion.
Okay, which we might come to. So, right, I'm going to ask Anne a question about this. So, following the plot, so Steve mentioned this, that everybody about sort of 2010, everybody's panicking about the size of the government deficit.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I think we're just talking about UK, but this was a worldwide thing. And if we go back to the 2010 election, if you like, the kind of political establishment really bounced the Lib Dems into signing up to a deal where reducing the government deficit was the prime policy.
Yeah.
So can you just tell us a bit about that and why you thought if that's created some of the problems we're facing now?
Yeah, so the point
Austerity.
is, well, I mean, the point is that the government deficit rises or rose because of the great financial crisis. Okay, so what we had was an implosion of the banking system, an end to lending into the real economy. This caused unemployment. This caused companies to go bust. This caused, profits to fall. And when that happens in the economy, the taxes associated with profits, with companies that are employing people and with employees collapse, and governments stop collecting, or government revenues fall, tax revenues fall. Now, it's sort of almost a seesaw process, really. When there's a financial crisis, the government has to, first of all, pay unemployment benefits and bail out the banks, but also collects less money. It collects less in tax revenues. And so the thing does this, or should I say the other way around. The system, the financial sector implodes and the government deficit rises. Now, when you understand that, you understand that the thing to do is to fix the banks, first of all, and secondly, fix the crisis. And when you do that, when you ensure that employment is generated and that companies become profitable again and all that sort of thing goes on, you find there's more tax revenues and the system stabilizes. So what happened was, and what's very interesting, whenever we talk about the deficit, politicians say in 2009 the deficit was such and such. They don't say in 2007 there was the biggest financial crisis almost in history, and certainly since 1929. They never start from 2007. They start from 2009, as if the deficit is just a given thing and is there because of bad behaviour by the government. And so then, but then what you get is a mix of the ideology of politicians on the one hand, reinforced by ideological theory in economics, and the biggest culprit of all of that was Professor Kenneth Rogoff, who's highly respected, always on Newsnight, has a professorship at Harvard, etc., and is known in economics, in the economics profession, as Mr. 90%, because he argued that when the public debt reaches 90%, it's the end of the world. The whole thing will fall down again. Well, what's happened is that we began in 2010, first of all under Alistair Darling and then under the Tories, to cut government spending on the back of the theory that if you cut government spending, you will cut the deficit and you will therefore cut public debt. And we've ended up
in a situation where we were told that after 5 years the public debt would fall, then after 10 years the public debt would fall, and now it's been extended to 15 years, and the public debt now is 90% of GDP. So rather than, so the effect of cutting government spending in a slump, as Steve has explained, has been to prolong and extenuate the slump, even while creating precarious employment. And the precarious employment has meant there's even less tax revenues for the government. So the fixation with the deficit, by the way, was really to shrink the state, and that was the real goal behind it.
So there's a sort of line that George Osborne used to say, which I think really connected with voters, and I think your countryman Linton Crosby picked this up, which is, we're like a household that's maxed out our credit card.
Yeah.
We've run out of, they're going to stop our credit card. We've got to cut our spending, or else we're going to go broke. And people really thought that was good. Now, you think that's a humongous fallacy.
Yeah.
Can you explain why the government's finances are not like our households?
Well, I think this comes back to what Steve's been talking about, and it comes back to the nature of money, right? And I think that's why it's really important for us to understand what money is in the first instance. First of all, money, including the government's money, is not a hoard of silver or gold stashed in the vaults of the Treasury or the Bank of England. That's not money. Most orthodox economists conceive of money as a commodity, right? And there are some, like Jim Rickards, who go around the world saying, gold is money, right? And that's not what money is. Money is always a transaction, credit and debt, a liability and a claim. It's always a relationship. If you have a surplus of corn, because you've been growing corn and you've got a stash of corn in your warehouse, that is yours. You can consume it, you can waste it, you can burn it, and when you do that, it's your corn. It's only when you decide to lend out your corn to somebody else that you create a relationship with others. Only in those circumstances does your surplus become a relationship. In a monetary system, money is always a relationship. It's never somebody with a hoard of gold or a hoard of savings. It's always a relationship of credit and debt, of asset and liability. It's always those claims. So, and this was most clearly explained to me by Ben Bernanke. In 2009, Ben Bernanke goes on television the first time.
He's the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of...
He's the governor of the Federal Reserve.
He was the guy on the helm when it hit the iceberg.
Yeah, so he goes on to a television program, 60 Minutes, the first time ever a Federal Reserve governor has appeared on telly. And the day before, he provided $84 billion to AIG, which was an insurance company, and had an account with the Fed. Now, AIG should never have had an account with the Fed, but AIG just about threatened the stability of the whole system, so they gave them an account because they had to bail them out. And he gave AIG $84 billion, or was it 89? I'm never sure, but it's something like a big number. So the journalist says to him, now, Mr. Bernanke, where did you get that money from? Was it from taxpayers? Did you get it from the tax? Did you get it, from the Treasury? And he said, no. He says, we have at the Federal Reserve something that every commercial bank has. It's called a computer. And we entered a number, 11 digits, $89 billion into a computer, and we transferred it to AIG's account. Now, it's not that simple, because AIG now has $89 billion, but it also has a liability. It's got to repay that money over time. It's got to sign a contract and pay, and it's got to pay an interest on that loan, right? But having signed the contract, having agreed to pay the interest, $89 billion plops into their bank account. And that's what happens whenever you apply for a mortgage. If you apply for a mortgage of $300K, there is no money in the bank from which your $300K is derived. There is nothing in the bank, effectively. But what happens then is that you enter into a relationship with the bank, you sign a contract, you promise to repay, the bank enters $300K into a computer and transfers it to your account. Now, when we understand that, we understand that debt and credit and this claim and this liability and this asset and liability are what money is. And the government has the most ability to apply for credit and to get credit, because the government, unlike you and me, has got 30 million individual taxpayers behind its back.
It's also got a bank that can't go bankrupt.
And it's got a central bank that can't go bankrupt. And by the way, we nationalised the Bank of England in 1945 because it had messed up in the 29 crisis. And the Bank of England is a nationalised bank. It's another government department, you know, and let's not pretend it's independent. It ain't independent, you know. So a government's got... So therefore, there's never a shortage of finance for a government. And I'm wandering off the point.
No, I think that's incredibly helpful. And I mean, it's a complicated area. So I think what we say is, you know, to get another go at understanding these concepts, read the book.
That's what I'd say.
We're sort of touching on all the areas we want to touch on. But I'm going to try and move us on a little bit.
Yeah.
So before we come on to your take on the current situation, I do want to take a quick digression away to talk about economics, the subject, the profession, and the academic subject, because you touched on this already, Steve. And the whole issue that the Queen said, why did nobody see it coming? And the economics profession said, well, nobody did see it coming, but because they weren't listening to heterodox economists who had a different analysis. So I think you've kind of spoken about that already, so I don't need to kind of repeat that, but it's quite surprising to us members of the public, because I tend to think of economics as being a very rowdy, sort of disputatious subject, but there's been a process whereby kind of debate's been closed down in academic economics.
Oh, yes, there's no debate. There was no debate,
I mean, can you just explain just how badly they're missing the point on how the economy works, and why the obvious question, you know, the obvious people pointing out why they made mistakes has not been accepted, if you see what I mean?
Well, it actually starts, I think there's something in humanity, and I'm talking in a church, which is a pretty appropriate place to discuss it. There's something in humanity that wants to talk about the perfect system. I've always got this sense of ideal, and that's been religion for a lot of people. With economics and politics, people often get this vision of how the world should operate, and then they spend their time trying to turn it into operating precisely that way. So economics is no different to that, and when you're a student at university or school, you learn a vision of a perfect system of interlocking markets which reach equilibrium and guarantee everybody gets paid exactly what they deserve to be paid. And it only works worse if you have any interventions that stop it functioning that way, such as trade unions, monopolies, or governments.
Can I stop you there? Right? I'm going to do an audience participation thing.
Yeah, sure.
Who studied any economics at school or university?
Quite a few.
Oh my goodness.
Lucky you.
Okay, so that's the mix of people we've got.
Okay, so what
I'm going to say, the people who put the hand up who did might expect economists to know how banks work and how money works, because I don't, so I trust you guys to do it for us.
Nothing is discussed on that front. You learn it's got a long...
Can I just ask one question? Because one of the things I just looked this up, is you're talking about what I studied was what would be called traditional economics.
Yeah.
And you're throwing the term heterodox, and that is actually quite a relation to anybody else.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Pick that up, Steve, yeah.
Okay, well, the mainstream, the stuff you the supply and demand. Okay? If I say supply and demand, I pretty much explained your economics degree to you. Okay? It's all seen as being a set of markets which reach equilibrium. Now, supply, you draw two lines, and why God, where is your eye drawn to but where the two lines intersect? Okay? And you automatically assume everything's going to happen where the two lines intersect. And that's the vision which Marshall gave us, and I can blame an Englishman for that, as a model of how the economy operates. And then that model itself evolved in response to the previous school of thought called the classical school of economics, which was Smith, Ricardo, ultimately Marx, which did not have a supply and demand analysis. They had a long-run cost of production analysis, and that was used by Smith and in particular Ricardo as a way of fighting against the remnants of the feudal system. But in Marx's hands, it became an argument that workers should receive all the output, so it became a socialist, anti-capitalist argument. And the vision of supply and demand, which was itself that was heterodox economics back then. That was a minority back from about 1770 on to about 1870. the idea that supply and demand drove the entire economy was the nonsense people on the fringe spoke about. But when Marx turned the classical school as a weapon against capitalism, then suddenly that school got downgraded dramatically, and the minority view that was all about supply and demand, which you found with a handful of rebel economists of their own type in the 1800s, like a guy called Jean-Baptiste Say. If you've heard of Say's law, okay, well it came from him, and a guy called Corno. That suddenly became the mainstream, and they tried to model the entire economy as if it were a system to maximise people's utility.
But I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that there's been lefty economists. There's been loads throughout the last 40, 50 years, but is the point they're not even teaching. The university courses are not teaching that there's different ways of looking at the issue.
I think you have to be reminded that Steve's had a huge argument with Paul Krugman.
Yeah.
Paul Krugman, in his textbook on macroeconomics, and you can go and look at it, talks about banks as intermediaries between savers and borrowers. In other words, when you go to the bank, you've got to wait for Mrs. Jones to have deposited her savings before you can draw that 300k. And Steve got into an argument with Paul, and Paul Krugman still to this day
Reckons he won the argument. Yeah.
will not accept that banks have this power to create credit on the back of,
But isn't the point that the university course doesn't teach the argument that you guys had? It just teaches one side of it, and the students don't find out.
But the section of Paul Krugman's book that deals with banks as intermediaries is that short.
That's a paragraph, not the thickness of the book.
Yeah, it's a paragraph.
So you've actually, is it right? You've actually called for a public inquiry into how academic economics has been run.
Yeah, because I think it's reckless and it's dangerous for society.
But at the same time, they're incredibly sincere.
Inflict crises on us.
I led a student revolt at my university in 1972, so I've got a fairly long history in being a stirrer in economics. But I swallowed this stuff until halfway through first year. Then I had the light bulb moment, and I can thank one of my lecturers to some large degree for that light bulb. And then I thought, this is all a load of shit. There's got to be, the reason was that one of the obvious conclusions of mainstream economics is you should abolish unions and monopolies. It just flows right from the theory. Monopolies and unions make things worse, get rid of them, the economy will work better. And then in this lecture, my lecturer showed that if you do have monopolies and trade unions, and you remove one but not the other, what happens to welfare? And the answer is categorically, using mainstream economic theory, it gets worse. And so here's the theory saying, this is the map to heaven, but if you take one step on it, you've got to pass through hell. I thought, this is nonsense. If the theory is that fragile, it's just one realisation of reality. There are both monopolies and trade unions. And then what looks like a sensible idea to abolish the lot says if you do one or the other, you'll make things worse. There's got to be something wrong with the theory. So I started looking at that stage. Now, that broke me out of that mindset. I was on my way to be a conventional economist, I imagine, though I've got slightly too much empathy to end up in that hole, I hope. But most of them, what happens is people with any social conscience in various ways find the inculcation of first-year economics as drives them balmy. They blame themselves. They think they can't understand it often. They think I give up on this and I'm going to do sociology instead. Only a tiny minority of relatively, or pardon me, I hope this is not an insult to anybody, kids in the room, but relatively autistic individuals end up going on and specialising in there. That's why the first student movement was called anti-autistic economics. But you have to have almost complete lack of empathy to accept that as a description of how people behave and how the real world operates. But if you do have that tendency, boy, there's a professorship waiting for you.
But I'm going to finish on a note of hope on the economics thing. So the students of the Post-Crash Economic Society, who are students, said, I did an economics course to find out about the crash, and I haven't been taught it. So they've actually now started a rebellion against the courses, and that's sort of swelled into a movement. Do you have hope that economics is going to change?
Well, Manchester University was the place where this started. I mean, the thing about students revolting is that they are in a very difficult position. They've got to get a degree, and they think there's a job at the end of the degree, and they think there may be a job in the City of London at the end of the degree. So, they're under some pressure to hang on in there. And anyway, they pass through and go on. But in the meantime, Manchester University has hired George Osborne as a professor. So we can see how far it's got there.
So there's still conflict.
So I mean, I know you're looking for hope, Richard, and we are too.
I do have hope with the student movement. There's several reasons for that, but one of them is that yes, they want to get jobs in the City of London, and anybody with any brains in the City of London after a while realises mainstream economics is absolutely disastrous for making money. So they actually prefer getting students to come with the heterodox exposure to some extent. That's a positive for us. And I tell the students that you won't get a job in academia, but you might get a job that pays 5 times as much and has got better working conditions in the finance sector if you learn what we're teaching you rather than the crap you'll get from Manchester. The other thing is the students themselves are still surrounded by a milieu of economic failure. And when they hear these stories, and the stories have no apparent relevance to the world in which they live, then that, if they've got any sense of intellectual integrity at all, that eats away at them and they continue trying to undermine it. So I think the student movement is going to last.
I'm going to move us on, but I'm just going to ask, because it occurred to me that people might think, it's a couple of old lefty Marxists here, but you guys aren't Marxists.
I'm not Marxist.
The only death threat I've ever got is from a Marxist.
So what are you, a Keynesians, right?
I'm a Keynesian.
Keynesian.
If I did say who I am, I'd actually say these days I'm a physiocrat.
But are you a Minskyite?
Yeah, well, I'm taking it right back to the physiocrat. So, it's a long story, but there's all forms of wisdom in economics, almost none of which have been picked up by the mainstream. So I want to blend a new combination that brings them all together, but I'd start from the physiocrats.
Okay, and the way to read that, debunking economics, it's all in.
You won't find anything with physiocrats there, you will.
Right, okay, right. Now, we've got about 10-15 minutes before I want to open it up to questions. So I'm going to turn it to your analysis where we're at now and what a clever Corbyn economic strategy could be. So I think, shall we start? I don't know, do you want to go, Anne? Is that right? So you think that the financial sector, the billionaires and the 1%, they're in more control of our lives at the moment than they have been at any point, including before 2007.
Yeah.
Just can you explain, what's your take on where we're at now, and if we carry on doing what we're doing, where we're going to go? Is that too broad a question?
No, that's fine. I mean, I think where we are now in terms of the Labour movement and the Labour Party is that we are fixated by fiscal policy. We like fiscal policy because it's social policy. It's about looking after the poor, it's about building houses, it's about education. These are all tangible things that we think as a body are important. And so the Labour Party is a bit like that. It is fixated by fiscal policy. What we don't think about enough is monetary policy and monetary theory. And the Labour Party doesn't talk very much, for example, about the City of London. It may talk about it in terms of industrial strategy, but it doesn't talk about it in terms of what are we going to do about the City of London, really. On the whole, I remember Ken Livingstone, who's widely regarded as a lefty, being a major advocate of the City of London because it employed so many people, right? So Labour has found itself supporting the finance sector and then focusing on social policy, housing, education, welfare. These are important, and I agree they are incredibly important. But I would like to see us shift and have a broader view of the economy. But more importantly, I think it's really important for Labour to advocate spending, and that's what it did in the election campaign. That's what Don McDonnell did and what the manifesto argued. But the manifesto focused on infrastructure spending, and this is very, if I may say so, very male, basically. In other words, the Labour Party, like many of us, think that spending on railways and bridges and even schools is a good thing. But they're a little more conservative about spending on nurses and on teachers. And so the current account has got always balance, but the capital account can be out of balance. I have great difficulties with that. They were encouraged in this position by Professor Simon Lewis of Oxford University and Jonathan Portes. And so they have adopted something called a fiscal rule, which in my view is Friedmanite. Friedman was the first to come up with fiscal rules. For me, the fiscal rule must be grow the economy, above all, grow employment, well-paid, skilled employment, not precarious employment, and the budget will look after itself. It really isn't the most important thing.
What Keynes said.
Was Keynes argued that, and I mean, Keynes was ambivalent about budgets and balancing budgets indeed. He thought they should be balanced, and I think they should be balanced. I think the best way to cut the deficit and to cut public debt is to create skilled, well-paid employment. And Labour is a bit nervous about arguing that. Doesn't argue that because the Tories are telling us we have full employment. So why on earth would you want to create more jobs? Well, we don't have full employment.
So kind of what's changed in Labour? I keep answering Anne or cutting the stupid one. So in 2015, Labour went into the election saying we're going to cut the deficit in a more humane way, more slowly than the Conservatives, but they're basically part of a kind of consensus saying that we've got to get the deficit down, or else we'll cease being able to fund it, right?
So
but in 2017, there's been a Corbyn revolution, which is not is still contested within Labour, right?
Yeah.
But they're saying, right, we're going to spend our way of trouble, but in a fairly orthodox way. So you think Corbyn's policy is not actually radically enough?
I think it's frightfully conventional myself. It's Gordon Brown's golden rule, basically. So the point is, you know, in the 2015 elections, we had Ed Ball saying, nobody's allowed to speak about spending. You know, had these terrified shadow ministers who were doing education or women.
Dance, I'd be terrified too.
And they would say, oh, we'd like a little bit of spending on this. And he'd say, no, until you can show me how you could raise the money for that from taxation or what you're going to cut to finance it. And Ed Balls was utterly ferocious about that. You know, the whole of the shadow cabinet were in awe of him and terrified of talking at all about doing anything. You know. Now, we've lost that. And what was fascinating to me about the general election was that Labour is still trying very hard to cost all our spending by saying we're going to increase taxes there and we're going to not spend this, that, the other. You know, we're going to cost everything. And in this election, the Tories wouldn't talk about costing at all. They kept talking about, well, if the economy expands, that will fix the deficit. And I have to say, I agree with the Tories on that one. So it was really strange. It was really strange. There was no costing in the Tory manifesto.
So the thing that struck me, I don't know who said it, but somebody said, I think it was a Tory MP said, so if we could just stop doing austerity now, like why have we been doing it for the past 7 years? You know what I mean? So
this is why I'm just partly talking about.
It's like, you know, if you just reveal there's been no reason for it, people are going to go crazy.
Scary.
Yeah, they've still got to think of this. We had to do it. It didn't work, but it was necessary at the time. Type thinking. It's wrong all the way through, and this is partly where you have to get beyond thinking like a household. And I've been thinking, how on earth do you get it through to people that you cannot save money? In fact, there's one word I've banned from macroeconomics, it's the word saving. Okay? It is impossible to save money. And I'm talking about individuals here. In terms of if you have an entire economy, the economy cannot save money. Individuals can, the economy can't. The logic I think I've worked out a little arithmetic way of making it obvious to people. I've invented this little fictional world called a country called Tom, Dick, Harry. Tom, Dick and Harry, okay? And Tom, it's a self-sustained economy. Tom spends on Dick and Harry, Dick spends on Harry and Tom, etc., etc. They've each got $100 in their bank account. They each spend $100 on each other each year. So the money turns over twice a year. That gives you total spending of $600 per year. Okay? Now, one of them, they've all decided they've got to save money. This is a really good idea to save money. This is Dick's ocean, saving money. So Tom decides to save. He's going to save $10 a year. How's he going to do that? He's going to spend $5 or less each year on Dick and Harry. So in that year, Tom's income is $200. His spending is $190. He saves $10. What's happened to the income of Dick and Harry? They've each had a $5 fall in income. So they end up with a $5 deficit each. So Tom's saving of 10 causes a deficit of 10 collectively in the other two. What's happened as a result of the economy? It's fallen from a $600 a year economy to a $590 a year economy. Now they keep on racing themselves down, each trying to get back to balance again. And the little thing I've got on my website, you can find it on my blog, they end up after 4 or 5 rounds, they're down to an economy of $540 a year with zero savings.
Okay.
So the only way you can save money if somebody makes more of it. Now the two institutions can make money, and I mean print the stuff. Okay? Effectively, created are banks who create money by lending out more than they back in repayments, and governments that create it by spending more than they get back in taxation. That means that the rest of us will then find there's more money in circulation and we can save. Now, if we save with the banks creating the money, that saving of money comes with exactly the same level of debt for the person who's had the increase in their bank balance. You don't get any positive gain out of that. But if the government spends more than it gets back in taxation, when the government spends on you, you don't have a liability back to the government for that amount of money. So that's liability for you, liability-free money. So it's actually easier for the government to create that money without burdening the rest of us than it is for banks to do it.
So
The government should run a deficit, in other words, to increase the money supply for the economy, and if they do that, we can have more economic activity. If they go the opposite direction, they reduce economic activity, and they wonder why the economy continues going down the tank.
So a big trope in the election campaign, which I think Linton Crosby thought was playing well with the focus groups, was there's no magic money tree. Labour got a magic money tree.
There is a magic money tree, it's called a computer.
Okay, so, Anne, do you want to just,
Yeah.
what I want to say is, like, if you're in your household or talking to your family or your workmates and somebody says, oh, there's no magic money tree, what's the easiest, quickest way? You just said, give me the quick put down on the riposte that they'll get.
Well, I'd always just quote Schumpeter to them. Joseph Schumpeter said, money is a promise to repay. That's all. It's a promise to pay. That's all it is. If you look at your banknote, it says the bearer promises to pay, right? If you take out a loan, you promise to pay, and that creates money, that creates credit. So money is a promise to pay. We can run out of promises. We can promise to do things that are not possible. You know, I promise to expand the ecosystem or take you to another planet so you can keep burning atmosphere and so on and so on. No, these are promises that are unrealistic. We are limited in what we can do. We're limited in the ecological services that we have. But we're not limited in our ability to make a promise within those physical limitations.
So your phrase,
So it's a
we can
social-
afford what we have the capability to do.
Yes.
We can afford.
We can afford.
We can create the money.
As long as you don't create
But
more
we-
money
we
than the
in-
economy
we
can
invented-
Limitations are physical, not monetary.
We invented money to enable us to do what we can do. That's why we invented money in a monetary system. In the old days, we had to barter. We had clumsy ways of undertaking transactions so that we could do what we can do. And we invented the monetary system. That's why I think the monetary system is a huge civilizational advance. And I've worked in Africa where they don't have monetary systems, when they don't have the institutions that uphold monetary systems. And so, as a result, there is no money. There literally is no money. But in our system, we have those institutions. We have a monetary system. So we can make promises within, you know, the resources that we have.
An eager member of the audience there.
It's a really easy thing to say.
So you speak up.
It's a really easy thing to say when they say there's no magic money tree, which is when they want to cut taxes on rich people, there's a magic money tree. When they want to invade Iraq, there's a magic money tree.
Yeah, when they want to bail out the banks, there's a magic money tree.
The disaster in Iraq wasn't that we spent $2 trillion on.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a practical, but
Okay, so I'm nearly out of time. I'm going to ask my last question, then I'm going to throw it over to the floor. So if we say, Corbyn, you know, we can afford, what we can do, we can afford to do by sensible new monetary policies, bank reform, and all this kind of stuff, and we can do. But yeah, I think most people, most voters would say, yeah, you can say that, but you know, on day one of a Corbyn government, the City of London would go on strike and there'd be tanks on the streets within a week because, you know,
Yeah,
they just go crazy.
I have the answer to that. On day one, I want Corbyn to say to the banks, thou shalt not lend for speculation, right? Thou shalt only lend for productive employment-creating activity. If you lend for speculation in London property, I am going to instruct the Governor of the Bank of England to remove the government guarantees that guarantee the deposits in your bank. I'm going to instruct the Bank of England to withdraw your access to QE. I'm going to make sure that the Bank of England will not lend you money at Bank of England interest rates, which are almost negative.
So we can
I, the
control the
government,
banks.
have a government department called the Bank of England, and I'm going to tell them that you, the private banks, cannot have those guarantees unless you change your ways and stop lending for speculation and start lending for production. We have the power. The banks are only solvent because we guarantee deposits, because we give them QE, because we give them low interest
So my
rates.
final question is, the Corbyn government, that would then create a massive row,
Yeah.
and the Corbyn government would fall if there wasn't a citizens' movement behind it. So, you know what I mean?
I doubt it would fall. The banks would fall into line straight away. They want those guarantees. They want that easy money. They want those cheap loans. They can't manage. They would go bust without that. Their shareholders would lose a lot of money. So, you know, they would fall into line pretty quick. But nobody, I mean, what was so awful about the Alistair Darling bailout of RBS and Lloyds and so on, was that there were no terms and conditions. If there were things like, oh, don't be too generous to your executives and pay high bonuses. Nobody said, thou shalt not lend for speculation.
Okay.
You know, they didn't say that. They said you can do as you like because we don't want to get involved in the private sector. We know that you, the banks, know best how to function, right?
Okay, thank you.
So we said, but we'll give you every bit of taxpayer guarantee you need to continue and be solvent. We don't give that to companies that grow tomatoes or Nike shoes or anything. We give that to banks. We'll give you those guarantees with no terms and conditions.
Okay. Steve, is there anything you want to just say about how a Corbyn government might defend? Is there anything you want to add on that, issue of how they would manage a radical policy, how they would kind of stop the wheels falling off on day one?
The main thing is to realise how money is created and then say, okay, the government doesn't have any limitation on its money creation capability, and the banks are creating money for entirely the wrong purposes.
And so,
as Anne's saying.
and if people understand that...
That's a starting point, but then you say, okay, what does the UK need? You've got to reindustrialise. The main problem you have isn't your government deficit, it's your current account deficit. The fact that you used to have an economy where 20% of the GDP was manufacturing a mere 20 years ago, now it's about 10.
So we're importing...
And therefore you're importing a huge
And
amount
that's
of use to
because
make...
our banks, 2/3 of bank lending goes into speculation on property, and very little bank lending goes to SMEs or to companies inventing new things.
And part of that's because it's much easier for banks to lend on property than anything else.
We've just spoken to an ex-banker who told us that, did he say it was RBS, had no risk assessors that could assess the risk of lending to the SMEs and to firms. They only had property risk assessors.
Right, now we're getting a lot of people with their hands up, so we're going to move in. So I think, isn't the small business sector is currently loaning money to the financial sector for speculation?
Indeed. So it's not
We might have
happening.
some small business people in the audience. So we're going to throw this over to questions now, right? We've really promised the vicar that would be out at 1:45, so we've got 25 minutes. I've got hands already, so I'm all right. If you can just shout your question, and then I will repeat it so that the audio recording gets it. And the first hand up is definitely you, Sam, with the white shirt.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. I get the banks can spend whatever they want, but surely if they inject all that money into the economy, they don't have to tax it back out again to prevent inflation, which just boils down to balancing the books.
Okay, so I'm doing this because we're recording this, so I'm going to, and it's really annoying when you listen to it and you can't hear this. So the question was, if you spend a lot of money, you're going to have to tax it back into balancing books, and sorry, say it again?
To avoid inflation.
You're going to just create inflation. So who wants to take that?
Yeah, that's the basic role of taxation, as well as distributing so the money doesn't accumulate in the hands of the wealthy. That gets back to people who actually spend the money. So taxation's got those two roles, because if the government simply created the money and didn't tax back, which is quite feasible, you could do that, you'd be talking, given the scale of the government right now, you'd be talking about increasing the money supply by about 30% of GDP every year. Now, that, of course, would cause inflation. So the taxation is there to get the money out of circulation. I was actually asked on a blog discussion group a couple of days ago, could you abolish taxation? And the answer is yes, you could if you made money decay. So money created by banks and governments would disappear over time. That is one way to... But the taxation stops the government creating so much money that it causes a huge surge to the money supply. But to cause inflation, you've got to have wages. Got to have wages rising faster than productivity.
I want to disagree with that. I mean, for me, inflation happens when you pump too much money into the economy, more than the capacity of the economy is capable of. So we had massive inflation under Mrs. Thatcher. It rose to something like 27%. She deregulated the banks. The banks created too much money, chasing too few goods and services. You get inflation, right? We're in a situation right now when there is a lot of spare capacity in the economy. There's a lot that needs to be done that is not being done because money is being spent on speculation and not product. So the question is, what happens is by pumping money into the system, you would increase in prices probably. And if you increase prices and wages so much that beyond the capacity of the economy, you'd get inflation. But it's not a problem right now. The problem at the moment is deflation, not just here, but in the United States and in Europe. The central banks cannot put up interest rates because for some reason inflation won't rise. And inflation is not rising because demand and economic activity is so weak. Now, what pumping money into, including government money, but actually what the government ought to do is encourage the private sector also to pump money into the system. What that will do is to increase economic activity. It's when it gets beyond the capacity of the economy that you get inflation. So although taxation is important, and I agree it does help with some stabilizing, the real issue is the capacity or the lack of capacity, economic capacity, or the spare capacity in the economy. That's what we have to worry about. And when you get over capacity, you get inflation. And I mean, I also want to say that inflation isn't just wages, right? We have massive inflation at the moment. It's asset price inflation, and nobody bats an eyelid about that. Everybody says inflation's a bad thing when it's wages and prices. Now, I mean, I'm not in favour of inflation at all, but I think right now what we have is are deflationary pressures, and we have to lift those, and you can only lift that by pumping money into the system. And it could be both public and private pressures.
This is also partly, the first thing people say, but won't that cause inflation? As if that's the major problem we face today, which of course we don't. The major problem is the level of private debt. And getting that down, that to me is the absolute priority to get the economy functioning well again. And in the case of just to give you an idea, in England's case, from 1880 to 1980, the maximum level of private debt in the UK economy was 73% of GDP. When Maggie Thatcher took over, it was 55% of GDP. By the time you had the financial crisis under 2008, it was 195% of GDP, more than treble. It's now come down to about 170% of GDP. It's still carrying more than twice the historic level of private debt that the UK has carried for the last 1.5 centuries. But that's the real problem.
And that
depresses... The scare about inflation, I understand where it comes from, but it's a distraction what's actually causing the problems.
Yeah, private debt depresses activity, it depresses investment, and it depresses spending.
So if nobody asks this, I'm going to ask you to talk about your modern debt jubilee before we close. But let's give other people another chance. So hands were up before. Do you want to? Let's take say 3, and then or 4 maybe, and then there's 2 ladies there. And there's a gentleman there with a beard, and there's a gentleman there with his hand up. And if you could make it as brief as you can, and then we'll have a round and we'll have another go. Okay, who wants to go first? Yeah, one of you two. Yeah.
Okay. So as somebody who was at Manchester studying economics back in the 70s, you were in the social sciences department, and one of the issues is that economics presents itself as a science with these fixed curves and so on. I know you referenced issues around implications for monopoly and trade union bargaining and so on. And the point is that economics isn't a science because of these issues. So to what extent do we see any kind of coming together of
Okay, so this is sort of new ways of thinking about economics. So let's just park that and gather the other ones. So yes, please.
Lots of people continue to talk about the way to fix the economy is to create, skilled, high-paid jobs. So I think part of the reason why everyone's obsessed with infrastructure spending is that they see that as being the way to do it. If it's not infrastructure spending that gets you those jobs, what is it? Like, if you think of this spending, how does it work? Everyone talks about creating these high-skilled, high-paid jobs. How do we do it?
Okay, so what do you want to target to get this high-skilled, high-paid jobs that we're asking for? Okay, sir, yeah, where were you? There, yeah.
I was follow up on the point about the solution that banks need to lend for production rather than for speculation. But if you look in practice, who our banks are, RBS, Lloyds, and the rest of it, are they actually capable of doing that? Have they become so addicted to lending for speculation that the actual skills you need to make banks work properly, I think probably just not there.
So the question is, are retail banks
You
reformable?
create highly skilled, high-paid jobs,
Yeah, so are our banks reformable? Are they too far gone as speculation machines to be able to do what we need to do? And yes, please.
I think I've been ministers in the last couple of days talking about really anything we spend builds up debt for future generations and that kind of affair. I kind of smell a rat there, but I don't know why.
Okay, so if we're building up debt for future, I mean, this is a trope that you hear a lot, which is if we borrow money now, we're going to loan it onto our kids, and who the heck wants to do that? I don't. So where's the trick in that? Yeah, what's hiding that? So, gosh, that's four.
You should do
Can you
number
do two
one.
each?
No, I think you should do economics as a science.
Okay.
Because that's your.
Yeah.
And what we might try and do in the next lot, we'll all do on a theme. So I'll announce a theme, and you put your hand up if you've got it, and then we'll do that.
I don't think you can design economics more asked about tit if you tried than we've actually managed to do. Because it's tried to build a model of how the world operates by extrapolating from an isolated individual and then building a model out of that. So when you look at, if you did your economics degree, certainly the older ones in the room would have done stuff about indifference curves. Anybody remember that crap? Okay. And then you derive a demand curve out of that. The next step of how do you go from individual to collective has been mathematically proven to be false. In other words, the downward sloping curve you can draw for an individual cannot be drawn for a market. Okay? Lots of reasons about it. I could wax lyrical about the technicalities, but it simply can't be done. So they started from a foundation where they could not derive an aggregate model. And if they pretend to do it by saying, let's wave hands and pretend that curve we're drawn for an individual can be applied at the market level, which mathematically it cannot be done. I want to turn economics around completely and start from what we've actually neglected, which is you can't produce anything without energy. Okay? It is simply impossible to produce anything without energy. You can't even live without energy. A little liner which led to the mathematics I'm working on now is simply the whole. We have models of production that talk about labour and capital producing output. Okay? Labour without energy is a corpse. Capital without energy is a sculpture. Okay? So you've got to see the means of harnessing energy, and that's why I call myself the physiocrat, because that's the last school of economics that began from saying we are exploiting a free gift. They call it the gift of nature, but it's actually the sun enabling us to grow stuff without, we just harvest it. So we're harvesting energy these days. We need a theory of economics that starts from that. And that gives you an objective theory of scientific theory as the foundation, which is the laws of thermodynamics and all the ideas of energy that are part of that. Okay? That's where you start. Are you going to write the books? That's where you start. That's the book I'm writing. That's where you start from. And then you get into building an explanation of the financial and monetary system, which is built on top of that. And the social classes we're part of as well. Because again, economics abolished the idea of social classes. Well, they abolished it in textbook, it exists in the real world. So I want to redesign the whole thing, and virtually everything you learn in economic theory, I'll be putting in a museum. Okay. All right, well I hope you're satisfied with that answer. Right, that was great. No, Anne, I'm going to, right, so this, you're loading down to my kids. Yeah. So I'm just quickly the question about creating skilled, high-paid jobs. What else? What should we do? Well, we should do what Steve is suggesting. I mean, and we drafted the Green New Deal back in 2008. There's a desperate need for jobs. For example, for
retrofitting our housing to make it more energy efficient because we waste energy massively. And we're dependent on the Qataris, for example, for a third of all our natural gas supplies, which, you know, is just crazy. So we need to be more self-sufficient, and we need to have a green economy. And that will require very high-skilled work. It will require architects, designers, engineers, as well as, you know, manual workers. So there's plenty of work that needs to be on the house. And then there's the whole question of care. You know, care, we don't regard care as something that ought to be well paid. Care of people with Alzheimer's or dementia is very, very low paid, but that's actually an incredibly skilled and demanding job, and it should be paid well. So there's plenty of opportunities.
Can I just plug
to provide?
We had Larry Sanders, Bernie Sanders' brother, here at this to say we can either kill off the old people or we can choose to look after them.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a great career.
Yeah. Now, are banks capable of learning? Well, I think they'll learn very fast under pressure, and you know they're just going to have to skill up their people. Now, anything we spend builds up debt. Now, that's what George Osborne told us back in 2010. And all that George Osborne's cutting of government spending has done is to increase public debt and bring it up to 89%, right, of GDP. So my view is that in order to cut public debt, and this is what's so hard for people like George Osborne to understand, government has to spend. See, the problem is, as Steve says, there's a massive amount of private debt in the economy. There's an overhang of debt. People are worried about investing, spending, because they've got all this debt that they've got to repay, right? There's three things you can do with debt. Private debt, you can write it off. You can say it's never going to be repaid. You can default on it, in other words. Or you could reschedule it over time to say you can repay it back over a long period. Or, and most helpfully, you could generate income to pay down the debt, right? So in order to help people create income to pay down their own debts, as well as for the government to pay down their debt, create jobs, create employment, which generates income, and with it government revenues. So I believe that to cut the public debt and the deficit, we need to create employment. It's not complicated, really. But George Osborne doesn't believe in that. He thought you needed really precarious employment to bring wages down to the same level as the Chinese pay.
If I can point out the rat that you smell, okay, it's that what the government does when it creates money is it's simply saying, we're going to put money in your bank accounts, private bank accounts, and we're going to match that with bonds we issue that stay on that end up on the asset side of the banking sector. Now, the way the government actually proceeds is, let's say the government ever says they're going to have a 10% deficit, 10% of GDP, a huge deficit. Okay? It issues bonds equivalent to 10% of GDP. And as soon as the bonds are issued and the Act is passed in Parliament, the central bank treats it as having that money, which means the Treasury can then spend that money. So it doesn't face them. If you and I wanted to do that by issuing bonds, we have to sell them first of all before we'd actually have the cash. So it comes out of that. They then show that, having put the money into your economy, they record as having a bond on the other side. Now that means they've got to pay interest, whoever buys the bonds. How do they pay the interest? A computer entry is made from the Bank of England to the account of the holder, crediting them with the money. It's all accounting operations. So fundamentally what we see as government debt is the record of all the money the government has created into the economy. It's the other side of the assets, but it's all created by the government because the government is the only institution in a society which A, owns its own bank, and which B, its spending is trusted by the rest of us. So we don't actually expect it to, you know, we accept it as money, not an IOU. Okay. So it's simply recording how much money is being created by the government. So long as you're creating the money with money you yourself issue, that is not a debt that has to be repaid by blood, sweat and tears. If you're creating money in American dollars, then yes, it would have to be blood, sweat and tears. But it's your own currency. It's simply an accounting operation inside the government, and they could literally write all that debt off tomorrow. Again, it would be an accounting operation.
So we're going to have two more rounds of questions, right? And then we're going to have to close it because we've promised to stretch back. So my first question, has anybody got a question? If you've got your questions about your nervous about putting the heterodox economists in charge of the economy, or you have your doubts about what a Corbyn government might work out like, you might be nervous about your house price or whatever it might be. Is there anybody who's got any questions that want to challenge, the Corbyn sort of thing? We'll take that as one round, and then can you put your hand up if you've got something completely different you want to ask about? Yeah, okay. So let's just have a couple of questions challenging the kind of status quo. Leave your hand up if you... Not challenging the view you've heard, is what I mean.
Yeah.
So, okay, gentleman there, we have a gentleman in the front, Hal, and one at the back, and then but we're going to have to speed up, so as you can.
Yeah, so...
Oops, sorry.
I've done it too.
Very practical question. You talked about changing what the banks do. That's a great idea. That's fantastic. However, the people who make money from banks are not stupid. If you start telling banks that they can only do this, that, and the other, I think they will immediately go bust, because people will realise that they are not the magic money trees that they were before. So I think you're a bit too optimistic to say, well, we'll just tell them what to do and they'll soon come into line. I'm challenging you, as soon as you start to tell banks how much they can lend, surely they will immediately go bust and you will have to nationalise them.
Okay, so
Hang on, let me...
Hang on, we'll take them all, and then... Okay, Hal, yeah.
Try and phrase this in an intelligent way, but if I've understood correctly that we have it within our gift to create an economy that allows for the creation of money at the government's behest to fund ways of generating wealth in the economy and circulate money, and that's a closed system, providing it's within our own borders, why did the Soviet Union fail economically?
Okay, so and then thank you. That's a good question. I mean, why can we do it on our own?
Yeah.
Brexit on our Brexit. And gentleman about
Yeah, it's just a simple question. How do we make a smooth transition from the 107% private debt we are today to something much more?
That's my modern debt.
That's a debt jubilee. Yeah, great. Thank you for that question. Right. So who wants to go?
So on the first question,
Yeah,
if the government takes away the guarantees deposits, what do you think will happen? Will you leave your money in the bank if it's no longer guaranteed by the government?
Yeah.
Would you?
No, yes, of course, I'll be fine. I'm talking about all the investors in the banks, all the share price of the banks, everyone who realises that the game's up. Surely that would have a massive effect.
Well, the game needn't be up. Nobody's saying that they would remove the guarantee and remove the QE and remove the easy money and remove the low interest rates if there wasn't a quid pro quo. If there's a quid pro quo, we can all live happily together. And you can be even more profitable, right? So the fact is that there is a quid pro quo, that's all. I don't think that they'll go bust. I think and I do actually think that if we removed all the government guarantees, all the subsidies, you see, we subsidise this sector. We don't subsidise the industrial sector. We don't subsidise we do subsidise the agricultural sector. But we don't subsidise other companies, but we subsidise banks. And if we say, look, we have leverage over you because we subsidise you, can we talk about terms and conditions? I think it'd be very foolish of the shareholders to bankrupt their banks in revenge.
I think they would, though. I'm
Do
going to
you?
agree with you. Because look at the size of the financial sector. It's about 4 times the size it should be in the economy. That's a massive downscale. A lot of it's cutting salaries that are ridiculous. Just a little anecdote there. One of my first experiences in moving to London was having dinner with a friend who's a Twitterati like I am, and his wife came along and asked what she did for a living. And she said, well, I am a school teacher, but I used to work in the finance sector. And I said, why did you change? She said, well, I got sick of the stress in the finance sector. They got to take on a less stressful job. At which point I burst out laughing. And she agreed with me and said, it's working, if hard, but at least I believe in what I'm doing. But she then said her first paycheck, when she got her first paycheck as a school teacher, not including her bonus in the banking sector, was 1/30th what she earned in the finance sector.
1/30th?
1/30th. That means her salary is probably £750,000 a year, double that with a bonus. Now, I think we can save a bit of money by cutting that back. But of course, in the process, 2 things happen. You are going to have a dramatic crash in the value of the banks, and you're going to have a banking workforce which has got none of the skills necessary to do what are necessary in the next stage. Now, a huge part of that is I want to have people who understand metallurgy. robotics.
I'm going to move us
computing.
on, right, because I'm really worried about the time. And really quickly, right, how can you do Keynesianism in one country without ending up like North Korea or Soviet Russia?
I mean, you know, I'm not advocating a closed economy. The thing that foreign investors love about an economy like any OECD economy is that A, they've got taxpayers and they've got institutions that uphold contracts, and B, they're a thriving economy. So, you know, I've worked on sovereign debt, and I've worked, for example, we worked in Uganda, and Uganda had its debt cancelled, and everybody said, oh, if you write off the debt, is nobody going to lend them money ever again? Well, we wrote off the debt, and so the balance sheet, Uganda's balance sheet, was massively improved, and so the money just poured in from the World Bank and the IMF and others because it was healthy. The same happened to Russia in 92, when Russia was in 92, 98. Well, Russia defaulted. The next day, she attracted masses of money. The really important thing about Russia was that she had oil and she was a thriving economy. So the point is that if we make Britain a more thriving economy and not keep undermining its productivity and its ability to create goods and widgets and services that earn us both money here but also abroad, money will flow and there'll be no problem.
And on your question about Russia, the reason Russia failed is actually best explained by a Polish economist called Janusz Kornai. And Kornai brilliantly saw that the theory of economics that we call a market economy actually applies to socialism, and that the theory of the constraints that we believe apply in a capitalist economy actually applied in the Soviet economy. And he talked about what he said, what he called demand-constrained versus resource-constrained economies. He said capitalism is not resource-constrained, it's demand-constrained. When it's demand-constrained, if you want to get hold of some of the existing demand that's there, you've got to innovate. So consequently, there's pressure to innovate and bring out new concepts all the time. And you'll have booms and slumps, which will tend to have a high rate of technical change. In the Soviet system, you're resource-constrained. Every last wages are high, every last piece of development matters, etc., etc. So nobody ever gets quite what they need. They've all got a budget constraint. And the easiest way to work when you've got a budget constraint is continue producing last year's goods, just in more volume if you're lucky, which is why a 1973 Cossack motorbike was actually a 1942 BMW. And I say that literally from having my then girlfriend's brother buy one. So it's failed because the incentives were not to innovate.
Okay.
Capitalism gives those incentives, but the financial system, pardon me being technical here, fucks those incentives up.
Right, now, I'm going to apologise, I really didn't get a question from Melissa. I'm going to ask her, but I want you to answer this modern debt jubilee question. So the question was, how are we going to do a transition to getting the debt down? And Steve got a really interesting proposition.
Once you realise that money is simply an accounting entry, then can you do accounting to reduce the level of debt? Now, it's so that the Bank of England created £200 billion of the QE by keyboard entries. Some ideas is let's do the same thing for the public. Not necessarily the scale of the entire amount of debt I want to reduce, but let's say 10% of the level of debt you'd like to reduce. Give everybody a per capita injection of money into their bank accounts. If you have debt, then that simply reduces your debt. If you don't have debt, that gives you a cash injection, which you can spend as you wish. And you therefore cancel credit-based money and replace it with fiat-based money.
And the key thing is that if you've been prudent and not borrowed too much,
you don't get
you
penalised.
get cash, and you can go
You get benefit. If you just write debt off at the moment, you benefit those who've gotten caught up in the speculation on the
Whereas
liability
if
side.
you're underwater, drowning in debt, you get a bit of relief.
That would also bring asset prices down, but you could also use it as a way of democratising shareholders. One thing you could do with the people who don't have debt, but therefore get a cash injection, you could say you've got to use that money to buy shares off the private companies, which themselves have to reduce their level of debt. So a set of accounting operations could drastically reduce the level of private debt, get us back to the stage where the money is fundamentally fiat-based created money, and then we've got past this hurdle. The other way to go about it is to have the Third World War.
Okay, right, now, listen, I'm really sorry, we've run out of time, so I'm going to give Melissa the last word, and then we're going to hand over to Tom and Henry, and just say a couple of things about the next event. We've got to be out of here at 9, but I hope we'll have a bit of time to mingle after these formalities. Yes, Melissa.
It's not actually the last word. It's a kind of observation that brings together two things you were talking about. I was really interested in what you said about the conservatism of Corbynism, which I find quite refreshing, but I can see politically would be a problem for you to say Corbynism is economically conservative, given the
Yeah.
But that connected, and I thought about, which we didn't really explore, no criticism because we've explored so much, about the citizens' movement that might support all the things you're talking about. And it seems to me that if you want to get people really enthusiastic about a new way of doing things, you do have to go to those citizens like the nurses, and I'm thinking particularly of the carers. There's hardly anyone in this room, and it particularly applies to women, who seem to be often outside this conversation, who don't spend a large part of their life caring for others. And if Corbynism were clever, so maybe this could be a last word, if Corbynism were clever, our third title out of many, it would connect to the whole politics of caring and bring that into a group and a movement that could support it in doing things beyond just nationalising, you know. And so you're nodding, and I just think, do you agree with that? I'm looking at
Yes, we
Yes,
invite
I
you to
do, I
agree
do,
with
I
that.
do. Yes, I do.
Look,
I don't want to keep you.
can I just say, look, thank you so much, Anne and Steve, for your time. It's been brilliant. Can we just give them a huge round of applause? And before I let you go, we're going to have two really quick plugs. And then, yeah, so Henry Liesengau from, what's your organisation?
Promoting economic pluralism. The idea being is we get some new ideas, more space for ideas we can actually learn. And I suppose one observation here this evening is that when you sort of talk about this, you realise how much huge amount of ignorance there is out there. That the system, the people who run the country, the people who are economists and so forth, have an enormous amount of ignorance. And of course, that means that the amount of learning we have to do as a country, as a system, is absolutely enormous. We have, I think, one advantage at the moment is that we have a crisis. And there's a saying, don't waste a good crisis. But we sort of did that, but then you have an anniversary.
So plug your event.
The point is that we're organising around the 10-year anniversaries of the crash, and there are lots of anniversaries to have. A whole series of events starting in September, which you will find out, and do come along, and that will be the basis for starting a movement, not just in the UK, but around the world, calling for and learning how to do economic reform to create new systems and new ways of running things that is based on a bit more knowledge.
And is it the Royal Society of Arts?
There's a lot of events on the 14th of September, which is exactly 10 years after Northern Rock at the Royal Society. But there are going to be events.
So what's the website?
On the 11th. It's 10yearsafterthecrash.com. We're launching it in about next week or two. And hopefully it will be tweeted around and go around. You'll see all the events there. You can book up, you can come along, you can get involved and read stuff.
I hope your diagnostics will show a lot of people from NW6 giving that. Right, Tom.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Richie. Just very, very quickly, if anybody here who didn't get a ticket, please give us your email, and then we can make sure you're on our email for future events before you leave. And on the 11th, our next event is on the 11th of September. It's in QPCS. It's on education. It's linked with Henry's event, education 10 years after the crash. All these maps are linked together. And then in November, we have an event on housing. Okay, thank you very much.
So 11th of September, QPCS. Thank you.
Also have a look for our Facebook page as well. If you go to
oh, sorry, Tom.
Better 2017 Facebook page. Thank you.
Well said, Tom.